legal jargon that, like me, you've probably heard. What do the terms really mean? We're going to try to figure that out, and we've got a panel of experts to help us do that. Before we get to our panel tonight, just a reminder, we love to hear your questions. If there's maybe a term that you've heard over the years and you wonder, what does that really mean? This is the show for you to get that question answered. There's a way to call, text, or email us. That information is on the screen. You can also fan the firm of Hollis, Wright, and Couch on Facebook. Just search their firm name. Also find them on Twitter as well, just Hollis_Wright. Our panel of experts tonight, normally Josh Wright is here. Steve Couch of the firm is here with us. Steve, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be here, David. You know, I'm glad we're doing this topic. Number one, class action lawsuits, by their very nature, involve hundreds, thousands, often millions of people, and it's because of the highly specialized nature of these cases that I've asked Tyler Vail from my firm to come be a guest expert on the show, because he handles this type of litigation for us. So welcome, Tyler.
Thanks, Steve.
Tyler, thanks for being here with us. And can we start from that, just the elevated view and just kind of an overview? Well, the term class action, we hear that a lot, but what does that really mean?
Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, class action is just a type of lawsuit that is filed usually by, one individual or a small group of individuals on behalf of a larger class of people.
Okay.
Where they're alleging that they have all been, harmed or damaged in, the same or similar ways.
Okay. So class really has to do the size of a group rather than an individual?
Yeah, it can. These class actions, like Tyler said, and he's right, these types of cases are often filed and prosecuted on behalf of many people, because many times the types of claims you're talking about, the economic value of them on an individual basis is cost prohibitive for that person to hire a lawyer and go forward and prosecute it. That's why the law allows for a group of people collectively to get together via representation through a lawyer, file and prosecute some claims that otherwise you couldn't do, because it's just an economic impossibility with the mandated court filing fees and the other expenses that you get into litigation. So a class action is a mechanism that allows many people at one time to get relief.
Okay. Again, as the show's going on, feel free to chime in. Ways there to contact us. A question we've got here: is there a minimum number of people required for a class action?
I like I said earlier, I've seen class actions involving hundreds, thousands, even millions of people. I don't think there's not a hard and fast line on the number of people that have to be in. I've seen law out there where as many as 40 people can constitute a class, and then like I've seen those other millions of people. What it comes down to is the group of people numerous enough that it's more economical to prosecute it on a class basis versus an individual basis. And many times that's a question that a judge or court is going to have to answer. But no, it can be as few as 40 and as many as, there is no, I guess there is no cap on it.
Right, I think judicial discretion is what it comes down to. Right, there's certain elements that a judge will look at in a case and determine, is this case right for class action status?
Yeah, and some of the email questions we get, we do hear so often the terms just tossed out there. A class action lawsuit has been filed. A question here, kind of going back to the basics. Well, what does that mean? How is a class action suit actually filed?
Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, it's filed exactly the same way as any other lawsuit. Okay. At a courthouse. The case is usually filed, like I said, on just by a few number of individuals who are known as class representatives.
Okay.
So these class representatives file a case, and then after the case is filed, they will petition or ask the judge to certify this case as a class action. And then it's kind of on the judge and the opposing party. There may be some issues going on, but just keep it simple. The judge will then look at the complaint, maybe look at some other filings, and make a determination, is this case right for a class action? There are a number of elements to look at in this, and we don't have time to go through every one, but there are some main elements. One are the types of claims that are being asserted by these few class representatives. Are they common with the class they seek to represent? So do all these people have claims that are in common? Mm-hmm. Two, are the claims typical? Do the class representatives' claims match what someone else would claim against this defendant or on this case? So they have to be common, they have to be typical. The third thing the judge may look at is the number. Steve's talked about that already. Is the class so numerous where, it's just not practical to have everyone file individual suits, so let's have them together. And then usually the last thing they look at is dealing with adequacy. Are the class representatives adequate representatives of the class, and are the counsel they selected going to be adequate to represent the class as a whole. Because the judge kind of comes in and looks at not only these 2 or 3 named class representatives, the judge kind of has to take on a role, unlike a normal civil cases, a single event case. The judge will come on and they have to kind of protect the class because they're truly, in a way, right now unrepresented. Right. You know, they may not even know this case has been filed yet. They will eventually get notice, but right now the judge has to step in and say, okay, is this the right way for this to happen?
Yeah. Another difference in a class action versus a regular lawsuit, beyond the filing question that you asked, is there's something called the Class Action Fairness Act. The CAFA has recently come into play for class action lawyers like Tyler, and that is after certification, defendants get an automatic appeal, automatic appellate review by an appellate court to look at the propriety of the certification from the trial judge. Did he do it right? Did he look at everything he was supposed to look at? Did he abuse his discretion and certify in this class? They'll either say yes or no. They can say, no, he didn't look at this, go back and look at this other stuff, Judge. Or they can say, no, this is improvidently certified and send it back and say it can't be certified. Or they can say affirm. Yeah. So there's that automatic appeal that by their nature class action lawsuits are going to, after filing, take longer than a regular lawsuit because, you know, shortly out of the gate, you're down at appellate court. Yeah,
I recall a story that I did about a decade ago. A community, a river was contaminated. It started with a single individual that had some medical issues. Went to a lawyer. From there, it ended up being a class action lawsuit. When those sort of cases come to you, a part of that is that to investigate. Okay, well, if that happened in this community or any other where there's maybe a larger group, is to investigate maybe similar symptoms, similar sort of maladies or diseases or things like that?
Well, when those types of environmental claims, and I've handled some, come to us, I mean, you got to think about the lawsuit. All the elements that Tyler talked about in a class action are present. I mean, you have to have some commonality and typicality, and you can have a class action just based on some common questions. You know, like the example you just gave, I mean, you can have a common question with respect to how did the water source become contaminated. You can litigate that 700 times if people in the community are affected, or you can all get together and certify and try that one question on behalf of a class. Now, when you get down to damages, how has that contaminated water affected this guy or that guy or the guy down there? Those are all going to be separate, and those will be litigated separately. But those common types of questions, class actions can be asserted and filed and get answers to those questions on behalf of the entire class so that everybody doesn't have to relitigate the same questions over and over and over.
Yeah, certainly makes sense from a simplicity standpoint, though, for sure. Time for our first break. As we go to break, a reminder to you. On Facebook, you'll find them attorneys on Alabama's 13. Now, we hope you, a friend or a loved one, never need legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of this show is simple. Now, your call for the show is free. If you have questions specific to this show, call or text us to talk to one of our lawyers. You can also follow us on Facebook. For sure. Welcome back in to the attorneys. Hey, we'd love to hear from you. Got some good questions coming up from you all here in just a bit, but your opportunity to let the attorneys here know what the questions you have and what you would like to know. You can call, text, or email us here with Tyler Vail and Steve Couch. We're talking about class actions and tort, mass torts. A question here that we've got, are there different types of class actions?
Yeah, there's a couple of different types, and they mostly are determined based on the type of relief that the case is seeking. For example, there may be an injunctive relief class. It's where a group of people is trying to make a defendant or group of defendants either do something or stop doing something.
Right.
That's an injunctive class. There's also the opt-out class, and typically that's what you'll see. That's mostly what I see, and I think most of what we deal with. Right. And that's where, you know, a group of people go forward, they litigate, and then if the case gets resolved or via verdict, everybody who's in the class or is a member has an opportunity to opt out. I don't want to participate in the relief that's being offered by the class or this verdict. I don't want anything to do with it. Then they can opt out and go get their own lawyer or just forget it. There's also those opt-in classes. There's mostly employment type cases. You'll see that. In fact, we've got one going on right now with the Birmingham firefighters. It's an opt-in class whereby in order to participate in the class and the prosecution of the case and the relief that is going to be offered, if there is any at the end, you have to opt in to participate. It's not an opt-out. So yeah, there's a couple of different types.
What are the advantages? Another question that we've got in. What are the advantages of a class action versus another form?
Yeah, Steve may have touched on it earlier, but the main class action is it gives a forum to individuals who have suffered really small economic damages, but they were still illegal, you know, acts by the defendant. A perfect example would be, you know, a telephone company, a cable company, cell phone provider, you know, just on their own attaching like a $2 or $3 administrative fee to your phone bill. No reason, they can't explain it, the fee just shows up. Well, you can't go and find a lawyer to represent you over that $3, you know, and you go to file a lawsuit, that's going to cost you $200 or $300 just to file the thing. Yeah. So it's so counterproductive, it's just not real feasible. A class action allows literally millions of people. It can be as large as 1 million people, or we've had a case with over 4 million people come together, and then all of a sudden that, you know, $2 or $3 charge becomes, you know, big money. It gets the defendant's attention, and hopefully we'll prevent this from happening in the future and make them reimburse the individuals for the charges they made. So, you know, the number one advantage would just be it allows people to come together, assert their claims as a group, and go at, you know, the big defendant, you know, as a group.
Now, let me add to this, because a lot of the comments that I hear from people are saying, oh, class action lawyers, they're making all kinds of money, and the people in the class get $2 or $3 or $100 or something that's not worth it. I hear you, I do. And I think, candidly, one of the advantages of a class action is that every single person doesn't have to go out and retain a separate lawyer, which would ultimately, at the end of the day, at least in my mind, be a lot more expensive than it would be to handle one smaller group of lawyers to handle claims for everybody. Moreover, you're talking about a group of lawyers or small group of lawyers who have agreed and gambled, if you will, to take those cases. Because normally, I'll say this, fees and expenses must be approved by a judge in a class action.
Right.
You know, a judge has to sit there and say, what are your expenses? How many hours you got in this case, et cetera. It's got to be approved by the judge. And you're talking about, in many cases with class action that I've been involved in, and Tyler has, you're talking about cases that take 5, 6, 7, 8 years of time and expenses to put in that case, you know, and then you hope the judge will award you a fee. So, you know, I hear all the folks who say that's a lot of money, and you know, I know that I'm a little bit jaded because I am a lawyer and I have participated in this, but you know, then there's those occasions where you see that some pretty high fees on a case that wasn't really litigated that long, although, you know, I'm not the judge on those cases, and I'm not trying to explain it, but, you know, nevertheless, I think it's an advantage in a class action that you don't have to hire, you know, thousands of lawyers. You can just hire one small group.
An email from someone who believes they have a claim that could be a class action lawsuit, questioning here, what types of cases are usually filed as class actions? Is there a consistency?
Yes and no. I would say the majority of class actions all deal with some sort of economic damage. You know, you're not going to find a personal injury class action, or if you find one, it's very, very rare, and it's going to be on a very small level, a very local level. They all involve, like I said, economic damage type cases. They're usually consumer-related cases, like I touched on earlier, usually against banks, phone companies, utility companies, you know, things of that nature. So, if you believe you know, probably the most common example, if you believe you're being charged, or you have charges show up on some sort of bill, you know, just aren't fair, you know, the best thing is you may indeed have a class action, you know, or you may not. The best thing to do is just call a lawyer and ask them. Talk to somebody who understands class actions, who has experience in class actions, and who's dealt with these types of situations before.
Yeah, you know, in Alabama, we used to have a lot more fraud-based class actions than we do now. I think, for the most part, the law on fraud in terms of class action, that's very, very difficult to get certified in the state of Alabama. Not to say that we haven't handled them. In fact, I just got through a year ago with another class action in another state. It wasn't in Alabama, and it had to do with health insurance. And the fact that if you got sick, they would increase your rates 100, 150, 200% if you got sick.
Right.
You know, so I've had those types of fraud-based claims, albeit not in the state of Alabama. But you know, it's really the certifiability of a class is really going to be dependent on each state's individual law.
That's right. You know, you can have a statewide class action, you can have a nationwide class action, and you know, over the course of the last few years, I would say that it's becoming harder and harder to certify a class, especially on a national level. There's been some recent opinions that come out that have really eroded the ranks of the class action and really kind of stepped it down a little bit. You know, but there's also statutory claims. You know, there may be there's one act in particular called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act that allows for it. So it can be statutory, you know, economic. There's several examples.
Okay. A question here. Someone has received a notice of a class action. Want to know what should they do now? What's the next step here?
Well, the first thing I would say is open it and read it.
Yeah.
I have been involved in many cases, Tyler has too, where, look, defendants understand, lawyers understand that a lot of people get these notices and they throw them away. In fact, the last time I checked, the actual response rate for a class action was somewhere between 14 and 15%. Defendants know that too. So don't throw it away. Open it up. Read what you're supposed to do. And if you've got any questions about it, call a lawyer. There should be a lawyer listed in the notice. And if you have any questions about that particular case or what you should do, when you should do it by, call that lawyer. That's what he's being paid to do. Tyler, you got anything?
Yeah, no, exactly. Read the notice. I mean, it has very important. If you're interested in participating in the class action, you know, that notice will have important dates that you have to act by. You just can't sit idly and do nothing. I mean, you must either, you know, fill out some paperwork and opt into it. You know, you may have to opt out of it if you feel this is something you want to pursue on your own. So, yeah, read it. I mean, it's there for a reason. The judge has approved it. Has important information. Don't just throw it away.
Yeah, I mean, because look, I think a lot of people think, look, I'm going to get my 23 cents. Boom, they throw it in the garbage. And like the case I was telling you about, albeit in another state, what those people didn't realize until they got in and were able to fill it out and tell me who they were. I mean, some of these folks were getting $20,000, $30,000, and a lot more than that, because that was an insurance fraud case. And again, I'm not saying that's a telephone or consumer case or anything like that, but you know, it should lay out what the relief should be, either specifically in terms of dollars or generally how the calculation's done. But the only way to be sure is to call the lawyer who's already being paid and is hired to represent you. He should be in the notice. Call him.
All right, good deal. Wrapping up our second segment, heading to our final segment. Every question you money. Our final segment here of the attorneys. Go ahead and get in this final segment. Love to hear from you. Ways for you to call, text, or email your questions to us. And you guys, you answer every single call, text, or email?
Yeah, we certainly try to. Sometimes it takes a little longer than I would like, but yeah.
Usually the next day they're knocked out.
Yeah, well, neat deal. Hey, another question that we've got here that we've got time to get to. What are mass torts and how are they different from class action?
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, we have spent the first half of the show talking about class actions. Mass torts are individual cases as opposed to on behalf of a group. They're individual cases. They're usually filed all over the country, but they may have a common defendant in common. A big example would be a pharmaceutical case. You know, it's someone in Alabama has had a heart attack related to this drug. Someone in Virginia's had a heart attack. So anyway, there's literally hundreds or thousands of these cases filed all over the country. A judicial panel will get together and bring all these cases into one court. And so they're individual cases, but they're going to be all grouped together in one court and in front of one judge. And what that allows for is mainly efficiency, and it prevents, you know, one court in Alabama ruling one way and a court in Virginia hearing the same motion on another case and ruling a different way, or in Washington or somewhere else. So it allows all these cases to have rulings that affect each case equally, you know, and that's real important on the pretrial phase of the case when you're dealing with discovery, admissibility of expert testimony, things of that nature. You know, if the defendant, it helps them out as well. If they have a company representative that needs to give a deposition, you know, they can give it one time, and it applies to every single case, as opposed to having to travel around the country and sit for 1,000 depositions getting asked the same question. So it's a good tool. It's a good tool for judicial economy and economic economy as well.
Yeah, and it can be certainly used on different levels. That example that you and I talked about the water source being contaminated, I mean, assuming you go forward with that on a class basis and it doesn't get certified for whatever reason, you could certainly handle that as a mass tort type of case, in that there's an agreement by the defendant and the plaintiffs, however many there are, and the lawyers that there are, that one deposition is good for everybody. That could technically be considered a mass tort, so it doesn't have to necessarily be a nationwide thing.
Okay, and what types of cases, another question we've got, what types of cases are filed as mass torts?
Go ahead.
You know, anytime there's a large group of individuals. We've had mass torts where we represented a huge portion of a population of a city. You know, it was a very local population, but they all had personal injuries, so you couldn't really class that issue. So it was a mass tort, thousands of folks in one city. It was an environmental case. We handle pharmaceutical cases, you know, are considered mass tort cases, where we represent individuals from taking defective drugs from literally 20, 30 states all over the country. You know, right now, we're handling a ton of cases involving the drug Actos, you know, causing bladder cancer, Byetta, another diabetes drug that's been linked to thyroid cancer, pancreatitis. So, you know, I'd say the most common drugs are the most common mass torts are pharmaceutical related, but also can be environmental, or really anything that involves a large number of people dealing with personal injuries.
There's those medical device cases.
Sure, medical device. The BP oil spill case, you know, it's been centralized in New Orleans. Everybody's familiar with that case, you know. Plane crashes, you know, for example. So numerous cases.
I don't know if it was on air or off, talking about MDLs. What does MDL stand for?
Sure, it's multi-district litigation. And right, when cases are grouped from all over the country into one court, a panel called the JPML gets together and they decide what judge and what court is going to hear these cases. And it's given the MDL label and usually assigned a number. Okay. So it's just for ease, for filing and other things like that. Yeah.
We've just got under 2 minutes left, so time enough for a final thought on this topic from you guys?
Yeah, well, I would say with respect to class actions, you know, just because somebody has a legal claim that may only be worth 100 or 200, I don't want anybody to think, well, nobody's ever going to take that. Nobody will ever consider it. I think that, you know, talking to an experienced lawyer will allow somebody who thinks they may have a minimal claim to find out wisely that it might be worth much greater. But if it turns out that they're correct and it may only be worth a couple $100 or less, that doesn't mean you're out of luck. That doesn't mean that somebody gets to keep your money by keeping it illegally. I mean, there are mechanisms out there to help you and others like you, and that is a class action.
Sure. And I guess on the mass tort side, what I let people know is that, you know, a lot of folks don't realize, hey, this pharmaceutical must have caused this injury. You know, a lot of times it takes, you know, a lot of experts, a lot of work, a lot of investigation. So if something's just not right, you know, young folks having devastating injuries just out of the blue, perfectly healthy person in their 30s, you know, has a sudden cardiac death. I mean, something might be there. So a lot of times people call us, we'll investigate a case, and determine a year later that, hey, this may have been related to something. So, you know, call, let's investigate, and we'll see what we can do for you.
A good deal. Tyler, Steve, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks.
Or the email.